All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second presentation of gCON for Google Apps admins. Hopefully you had a chance to join us for our first session today. I know it's pretty specific to certain Google Apps domains, but we covered the Postini transition and the various stages of that, and we had a great Q&A session with Aaron Lynch, who is the Postini transition manager at Google. If you didn't have a chance to join us for that presentation, you can go to the Google Plus event page and check out the recording, or you could always go to our YouTube channel where the video is already available. I just want to cover a couple of quick things before we jump into this presentation on mastering messaging administration in Google Apps. You'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen there should be a few links there that will take you outside of the Hangout. The first is a very short form to fill out so we can send you a copy of Kyle's slides today. So if you want to have a copy of that slide deck, just fill out the form, please, and we'll send it over to you hopefully very shortly after the presentation. We also are having another presentation this afternoon. It's a Google Apps Admin Roundtable. So we'll be joined by 3 different Google Apps admins who have varying levels of expertise and are across very different types of domains. And we're going to discuss their successes and challenges in administering Google Apps. And we'll open it up to some questions for you guys as well. And lastly, if you have any general Google Apps admin questions, or if you want to follow up with one of our presenters today, please check out the gCON Google Plus community. That's a great resource to ask questions of our presenters, both today and in the past. And you can also just have your questions answered by regular Google Apps admins who hang out in the community and are really helpful when it comes to answering questions. Also, for questions for this presentation, we're using the Q&A app, so that will also be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're unable to see that, click on the square grid icon in the top right corner of your screen and just select the Q&A app, and you should be able to see it there. So submit your questions there if you'd like, and please take a moment to see if your question's already been asked before, and you can just +1 it. So that will really help me when we're prioritizing our questions here at the end of this session. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our second presenter for today, Kyle Quinn. Kyle Quinn is the Senior Product Evangelist at BetterCloud, and he has a ton of experience when it comes to messaging administration in Google Apps and just Google Apps in general. So he's a great resource, and he's got an awesome presentation lined up for you guys today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you, Kyle. So if you want to go ahead and get started, you can take it away.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to apologize. I do have a little bit of a cold, so I'm hoping that my voice will hold out for this, and bear with me as I drink a little bit of tea to make sure my voice is doing all right. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation here. Again, our goal today is to cover mastering messaging in Google Apps. Again, we have an hour presentation, so I don't think in an hour I can fully set you guys up to master all the messaging and administration in Google Apps. But my intention is really to give you a high-level overview of the different pieces that are in Google Apps, the different techniques that you can use and leverage. I won't go into super detail on how to configure each and every one, but based on the terminology that I get, the Google does have a lot of really great documentation out there. So, kind of our agenda, I'm going to start off by covering just a mail routing overview. I'm going to go over inbound mail routing, mail that's coming into your domain. I'm then going to cover the options for outbound mail routing. That's mail that you send out to the rest of the world, essentially. And then we're going to walk through the kind of specific best practices and routing recommendations for Google Apps around spam filtering, SPF records, DKIM records, encryption. We're going to cover some management tools. And then the end, I'm going to cover some testing and troubleshooting tools that Google has out there that are very handy when you're trying to troubleshoot and figure out what's going on with mail routing. And then,
hey, Kyle, can I stop you for just 1 second,
yes,
really quick? We already have somebody asking about the slides. The form is just to get your email address so we can send you those slides. We are going to send those out hopefully by the end of the day, if not by the end of this week. I promise that. So I know it's directing to the Guru newsletter sign up, but that's just so we can get your email address so we can send you the slides. Okay, so Kyle, go ahead.
Okay. So, and then that little cartoon is kind of funny, but I think for most of us, our incoming email is much faster than our heartbeat sometimes. So, a little bit about myself. I have 17 plus years in IT. I've done primarily messaging collaboration throughout that time. I was one of the founders of Tempest Nova, a Google Apps reseller. I've worked in a lot of email systems. I actually got my start in Lotus Notes. I've done a significant amount in Exchange as well as GroupWise. And then for the last several years, I've been doing Google Apps. Really started in Google Apps about 2008 and have continued working in it since that time. So I've also done a lot of architecting a lot of the largest Google Apps customers' email systems, so helping them come up with the initial map of what their email routing will look like and what it will entail. So I'm going to start off with the mail routing overview, and this is meant to be kind of a high level covering kind of the basics of mail routing. First graph here is, or first picture here is how I think most of management sees mail routing. They see it as a fairly simple process of mail comes in from the internet to Google Apps, mail goes out to the internet to Google Apps, users log onto their machine and they view it. I'm guessing very few of your organizations have mail routing that looks this simple. Very quickly, someone says, oh, well, we need some DLP, some data loss prevention on the outbound, and suddenly you've got to route your mail outbound so that it goes from Google to DLP. Next, someone will say, well, we've got all these printers and scanners locally, so we need to make sure that those are able to send email when you scan a document in or that. So, you know, now you're setting it up to route to those on-premise systems. Then you usually have, you know, a legacy email system that's out there. Maybe it's Lotus Notes, maybe it's Exchange. And so you've got to set it up so that it can receive and send email, whether that's for users that are staying on the legacy mail system, maybe for particular business reasons, or more than likely you may have other systems, whether it be printers or servers or something else that leverages those legacy email systems. So you might keep them running in the background, but again, it's things we need to consider when we're architecting our email routing and configuration. And then you start getting into encryption and other items, and it gets more complex. So you can see here quickly how we went with just a couple things that are added in. We went from a very simple diagram to a very complex diagram. And adding each of these different items in changes how you set up and configure your email routing, and then also how you set up and configure the various components that you need within your system. So to kind of jump into configuring inbound routing, the real best practice that we get from Google is that they recommend direct delivery of email into Google Apps systems. And what this means is that you would actually have your MX records pointing at Google's list of standard IP addresses. And Google has a preset list of IP addresses that are out there. Therefore, essentially everyone that's on Google Apps uses the same set of IP addresses, and they route directly into Google's data centers to then route mail within the Google system. What this really does when you do direct delivery is it allows you to leverage all of Google's features. Google has a lot of nice features that allow you to do multiple different things within your email, multiple things that are even outside of Google Apps as far as legacy systems or smart hosts or those type of things. And you can really leverage all those tool sets when you're delivering directly to Google. It also allows you to take advantage of their spam filtering and some of their other high-end features that are very intelligent and that we'll learn as your company continues to adopt Google Apps and as email continues to be delivered. The systems will actually learn from the type of email you get and kind of intelligently route and control spam. Once you have your email routed into Google, again, we have different options that we can configure that I'll cover in more detail, but we can do a dual delivery, a split delivery, catch-all address, or content-based routing, depending on what's coming into our domain. So again, dual delivery. This is essentially when you want the email to arrive in two different email boxes for the same email address or the same user. So a great example of this would be if someone is on Google Apps but you're using a different system to archive your mail. Or perhaps there's a business reason that users are kind of living in two different email systems. Maybe they're using Gmail, but occasionally they have to use, a mail that's stored on an Exchange server or something like this. That's when we run into dual delivery. It's also something that's often used in the migration process when you're migrating from a legacy system onto Google Apps. You oftentimes will use dual delivery as you're doing the early phases of that migration. So when we set it up, the key on this is that we want to leave the primary routing in place. And again, our primary routing is always going to be our MX records pointing at Google Apps. So all email will be delivered to Google Apps. Then from within Google Apps, we want to set up a secondary route through the receiving routing section within the organization. And what this will essentially do is it'll say, okay, all email coming to this user organization, we want to have one copy come into Google, but then we also want a second copy to be routed down to this IP address or this host name. And what that does is allow it to transfer that mail down to a secondary email system, which can then deliver it to the specific email box down there. Again, this, like most settings, is controlled by the organization, so you can do it at a top-level organization, and it will be inherited down for all users, or you can do it in as detailed of a suborg as you want if it's just a small subset of users. Another option that's similar to dual delivery is called split delivery, and this is when you have different users in your organization on different email systems. Again, this happens very often when we're moving from a legacy email system to Google Apps. This will happen. This can also happen, if you have a situation where maybe users need to permanently stay on your legacy email system for particular reasons specific to your organization. And again, this is set up in the same area. It's in the receiving routing section. And the big key to differentiate between dual delivery and split delivery is that on this one we want to actually change the route option. And what this means is that instead of adding a secondary route like we did in dual delivery, we're actually going to change the routing option so that it routes directly to the other system. Keep in mind that users that are in this org will not receive mail in Google Apps. All their mail will be routed into the legacy or the secondary system that you've configured. So again, split delivery is intended for when you have users in multiple different email systems. One of the other options that you have is to configure a catch-all address. A catch-all address is actually, to be honest, something that Google doesn't recommend. But what it's intended to do is catch all of the email that's going to non-existent users on your account, or on your domain rather. So these are all the, maybe someone mistypes an email address, if someone has their email address as David instead of Dave or something like that, all of those emails would go into this catch-all address, and then someone could monitor that and distribute out the important emails as necessary. The reason why Google doesn't recommend it is one of the tricks that spammers will use is that they'll just cycle through names on your domain trying to get an actual active email address. And when they do this, they send out potentially thousands of emails. And what happens with a catch-all address is that this one account is collecting all of that, and very quickly you're going to hit Gmail's daily receiving limits. So Gmail has limits on how much email a particular account can receive in a day, and your catch-all account is going to hit that fairly regularly as spammers try to distinguish and figure out what actual email addresses are on your domain. So it's really not recommended that you set up a catch-all address, but if you want to, it's definitely an option that's out there. And again, it's set up in the routing section of your Gmail configuration. One of the other nice features that Google has on inbound routing that you can configure is content-based routing. So this is essentially if we want to control what is delivered into our domain based on content. And this can be content compliance. Maybe there's particular content that we just want to block. We don't want it to come in at all. Maybe it's objectionable content. We don't want anything with inappropriate language or inappropriate type content. Or we can do attachment compliance, which is essentially if we want to block a certain type of attachment. Something very common with attachment compliance is maybe videos or MP3 files. You don't necessarily want your staff or anyone else sending someone, a couple gigs of music files that were illegally downloaded or anything like that. So a lot of organizations will set up attachment compliance to basically say, you know what, we're not going to allow you to send MP3s or movie files or whatever the case may be into our domain. These are all configured again in the advanced settings within the Gmail, and you can go in and customize them and configure them to exactly what your organization wants. These are also applied at the organization level, so you can have different content compliance rules based on the particular organization within your Google Apps setup. So what this does is it may allow you to have different content compliance rules or different attachment compliance rules, maybe for the marketing team than the rest of the organization. Marketing may have a business reason to receive movie files, whereas the rest of the organization may not. So again, it gives you very granular control to configure exactly how you want the rules to be set up and how you want them to be administered across your domain. Moving on to outbound routing, we've kind of talked about the mail coming into our domain. Now we're going to discuss the mail going out of our domain. Again, the recommended best practice is that we get email from our Google Apps system out to the internet as quickly as possible and with the fewest number of hops as possible. So again, as much as we can directly route it out to the internet, the better off we are. And the reason for that is, number one, the fewer number of hops means the fewer troubleshooting steps you have to walk through as in case things go wrong. It also allows for the fastest delivery of mail. So when you send an email, we all assume that it's going to arrive at the recipient's email account within a matter of a couple seconds to a couple minutes. Each hop or each system that you have that email go through adds potentially additional time, and particularly if you have a system that maybe spools up email or does those type of things, you can start to get into some pretty significant email delivery delays. And again, when you're troubleshooting that, you kind of have to walk the email through each step in the system to figure out where the delay is. So one of the things to also keep in mind with outbound email is that outbound email is also all of your, with Google Apps and the way it's architected, it's also all your email between your users on your domain. So if I send an email to another user at my company, it actually follows that outbound email routing. There's not a specific routing segment for internal email. Some of the things that we're going to cover with outbound email, we're going to cover smart host routing. We're also going to cover the dual delivery aspect of outbound email, and then again, content-based routing. So smart host routing is also referred to as an outbound mail gateway. It would be something similar to a DLP system or some type of system that you want all of the email to route through before it goes out to the internet. Some things to keep in mind as you're configuring this smart host. You want to make sure that you've configured it to accept email. It's a little bit different configuring it to accept email from Gmail servers. A lot of times these smart hosts are, whether they're cloud-based or whether they're on-premise, they're set up to really accept email from a small set or a specific IP address. We all know that as we get into Google Apps, there's thousands of IP addresses that Google's email servers and data centers leverage. So a lot of times you have to do some unique configurations to get the smart hosts set up, configured correctly, so that they allow incoming mail from your Gmail servers. You also want to review your SPF and your DKIM settings, and we'll cover those in more detail later on in the presentation. But you want to make sure that those are set up and configured because those are usually based off the last hop on your outbound email routing. So when it actually leaves your company's systems. If you route mail directly out of Google Apps, then the last system is Google's. If you choose to have a smart host after that, then the last hop or the last system is going to be the smart host. So you want to make sure that you've configured your SPF records and your DKIM records to accommodate for that being your last hop on the way out. The next thing we want to talk about is dual delivery. And again, we discussed this for inbound mail, and that's delivering inbound mail to two different mail systems so that it arrives in Google Apps and also perhaps in a legacy mail system. Where we really use dual delivery on outbound mail is when we have an archiving system that's a non-Google Apps system. So maybe you're not using Google Vault, you're using another system out there. So you want to route all outbound mail so that that's also captured in the archiving system. And the way we do that, again, is that we configure it through the send routing. There's a receiving routing section and a send routing section, and we configure it within the organization settings. And you can see it there on the graphic. I've got a sample Exchange server, so let's say we wanted to route all outbound mail so that it goes, obviously out to the internet to be delivered, but then it also goes into the Exchange server where we've got some archiving set up. On outbound, you can also do content-based routing. This is nice because you can have some control over what your users are sending out. You can put some rules in place that say, there are certain content that you guys aren't able to send out. Maybe you guys have some specific keywords or project names or something like that you don't want to be stored in email, so you can block any of that content going out. You can also do some objectionable content, and as well as some attachment compliance. So maybe, like we said, we don't want people receiving MP3 files in. Maybe we also don't want people sending out MP3 files out to the internet or movie files. Again, these are configured on the organization level, so you can get granular and have different settings for different organizations. You can also, within this section, configure some of your TLS settings so that things are transferred in a secure connection via TLS. And again, I'll cover some more of that in a second here. Some of the other options we have on outbound mail routing, we're able to append a footer, which is nice. This is usually a compliance footer that says, this is intended for such and such recipients. We've all seen the standard legal footer. You have some ways that you can customize the footer, which is nice. We can also do some restriction of delivery. So we can basically say, we don't want we don't want our users to be able to send to a particular user, a particular domain. We can restrict those types of things. One of the things that a lot of organizations kind of start off with on restrict delivery is I've heard a lot that they say they want to block sending to Gmail. This is not really recommended because there's a lot of times when people are interacting with maybe smaller organizations or that type of stuff where people are leveraging Gmail addresses. So it's one of those items that comes up, but you want to make sure that you talk through the reasons for it and make sure that you're not blocking people from actually doing their day-to-day job. And then the last item is TLS compliance. So a secure way to encrypt and send messages that ensure that a certificate is exchanged and that it's transported securely throughout the whole transport process. Within the TLS compliance section, you can set up specific domains that you require TLS to be configured for, which basically says that we will only exchange mail with that domain if we get a handshake and the TLS is in place. So if there are particular maybe business partners that you do work with, or maybe your health insurance company or something like that, that you have specific security requirements, you might want to select their domain and enforce TLS on that, which just ensures that there's an added layer of security and encryption on all email transport between the two domains. Again, recommended best practice is to use TLS whenever it's available, but then you can also set it up so that it requires that for us to exchange email with that domain, that we have to have a TLS connection. I'm going to go through some of the additional routing recommendations. Again, these are really Google's best practices on how you should set up your routing and the key things that you should have configured on your domain just to help prevent spam and spoofing and a lot of the other things that go on out in the wild, wild west of the internet. The first one we want to talk about is spam filtering. This becomes a very big issue. We're all aware of how much spam is out there, how much spam people receive. I will say that since I've moved to Google Apps, the amount of spam I've received has dropped dramatically. I think Google Apps does a really good job of filtering out spam. One of the nice things about the way Google Apps is architected and the way they handle spam is that they've built on the back end an intelligent spam handling system that essentially learns from what your users mark as spam, also what they mark as not being spam, and it also learns from the entire amount of email that Google is handling on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis. Google actually handles between all of their Google Apps customers and their Gmail customers, handles a significant percentage of the email traffic throughout the world. And what that allows them to do is to actually get predictive with spam. So as spam attacks go out, Google is aware of them very early on in most cases, and they're able to react, and their system learns and adjusts to it on the fly. Because of that, you want to make sure that you're configuring your spam filter settings correctly and taking advantage of the full Google services on that end. So some of the spam filtering settings that we want to make sure that we review and determine what's best for our organization. The first one is aggressive filtering of bulk email. Bulk email is essentially items that score so high on the spam list that Google doesn't even transfer them into the user's spam folders. They're essentially blocked out at the edge and not even allowed within the system. So you can choose how aggressive you want to be on that filtering. We recommend that you do check the aggressive filtering option. However you want to monitor that, and if you do get in a situation where things are being blocked that you don't think are necessarily bulk spam, you can adjust that back if you need to. We also recommend, or Google recommends, that you bypass the spam filter for internal messages. This is for when users are sending email within your domain. So it's from, user A to user B within your same domain. And like we said, remember, all outbound email follows that outbound email routing path. So it'll essentially go out to the internet through your outbound routing and then come in through your inbound routing. And so we want to make sure that we're not labeling any of those as spam, so that those are all transferred in. Where I've seen this happen a lot is sometimes if a particular user is sending out a lot of email invitations, maybe they're in charge of a conference room or something like that they schedule out. Sometimes we see those start to get selected as spam, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So we want to make sure that we turn on to bypass the spam filter for internal messages. And then we also can have an approved senders list. These are basically senders that we trust, and we want to make sure that all email from them is routed in and is bypassed the spam filters. So again, you don't need to add your own domain as an approved whitelist. You just check the bypass spam filters. This would be for partners or other domains that you want to make sure that their content isn't snagged by the spam filters. Keep in mind that Google continues to learn, and they've got an intelligent system on the back end. So a lot of organizations, it's the best practice to kind of let Google handle the whitelisting and blacklisting portion of spam filtering just with their intelligent design. But if there are specific domains or specific users you want on the whitelist, you can add those. We also have the option for block senders or blacklist. Again, we can configure on an email address or a domain level to block all incoming email from. So if there's a particular domain that you don't want to receive email from, you can block them. You can also customize your rejection message. Google has the default standard one, but if you want to customize it with perhaps more information, perhaps an action that they could take if they feel like this is a mistake or something like that, you can customize your rejection message. Keep in mind, and this happens particularly in large organizations where you might have multiple admins managing things, that all approved senders will bypass the block senders list. So if you happen to have a user that's on a whitelist and on a block senders list or a blacklist, that email will be delivered. So just something to keep in mind. Again, it doesn't happen very often. It's usually an oversight, but if that does occur, that's how Google will handle it. And like I said, Google spam filters learn based on kind of spam throughout the internet. So we recommend that you keep the block senders to kind of a minimum and only what's absolutely necessary. Again, Google usually knows about the domains out there that are heavy offenders with spam, and they've already got them blocked before you can. And it's just one less thing that IT admins don't have to spend as much time managing, because Google does a good job of managing and controlling that. One of the other things to keep in mind if you're moving over from a legacy system, we don't always recommend that you take all of your block senders and add them to the blacklist within Google Apps, because a lot of times Google already has those on the offending list internally. That email is going to be already blocked, and again, you can start with a clean system and build out from there. That being said, if there are specific domains you want to then black, add those items. SPF records, or Sender Policy Framework records. Again, this is a strongly recommended best practice. One of a lot of the things that Google has built their best practices around are really controlling spam throughout the internet. So the SPF records are essentially a way for other email systems to kind of do a check back and confirm that your domain, that email coming out of your domain is actually from your domain. They prevent spammers from spoofing your domain. We've all got messages that look like they're coming from your domain, and when you actually look at them, they're coming from another domain. I often get messages routed to me that look like they're actually sent from my own email address, and want to go and look in the header information, they're routed from another domain that's trying to spoof things. So this is just a way to help prevent that. SPF records are configured within your DNS settings. So depending on how you have your DNS, if you have internal DNS that you guys have configured, if you're a smaller organization and you're going through your DNS is configured through your domain provider, whether it be GoDaddy or some of the other options out there, that's actually where you'll configure your SPF records. And we always want to update SPF records rather than use multiple SPF records. If you're doing something with dual delivery systems or split delivery where you have two systems, you still want to make sure you maintain a single SPF record because it can create authorization issues if you have multiple SPF records. So the way you set it up is you essentially log into your DNS server or your DNS provider if you're using a GoDaddy or similar type of organization, and you create a text record. And your text record should be exactly what it says there. If you Google SPF record, Google Apps, or Google for Work, this is very quick and easy to find. A lot of the large providers will also automatically configure this as part of when Google automates the MX record portion of configuring your domain. So you may already have this set up. If not, it's strongly recommended that you configure this. If you do have additional mail servers, maybe you're on a dual delivery or a split delivery type of system, we want to make sure that we add the server's IP address just before the tilde all in the argument, and you can do it in either an IP4 or an IP6 format. So again, you're able to add multiple email servers within a single SPF record. We don't want to create multiple SPF records because it will confuse the authorization. Domain keys identifying records, or DKIM as it's referred to. Again, this is another strongly recommended best practice from Google. This provides a digital signature in the email header for all email being sent from the Google Apps system. It's essentially a signature that says, yes, this came through Google systems, and yes, you can trust it. It will help ensure, again, that we're being good citizens in the internet. We're helping prevent spammers from spoofing our domain. It will also help you guys make sure that you're trusted senders so that your email that you send out is not being captured in spam filters on recipients' email systems. Basically what you do is you log into your Google Apps domain and you'll set up a domain key that you'll then have to set up within your DNS system. One thing to keep in mind with outbound mail, like I said before, if you have a smart host or a DLP system or another system on your outbound route that's going to modify the message, maybe it applies a footer, maybe it does something else, you want to make sure that you account for that in your DKIM configuration, because anything on the outbound system that updates a message will actually invalidate the DKIM signature and may cause issues with the delivery, because it's now an email message with an invalid DKIM signature, which is often a big sign for spam. Another thing to keep in mind, if you've set up DKIM with your legacy email system, you can't transfer that key. You'll need to create a new key specifically for Google Apps. And the way we do that is we actually go into the Gmail settings section and we go to the Authenticate Email link. Once you get in there, you'll see a place where you can click on and generate a new record. That will generate your record. And then you go in again through your DNS system, which is your internal DNS system, or if you're leveraging one of the many DNS providers out there, you go in and create a text record with the data from that Authenticate Email page where you just generated your key. Once you've got that set up, and it may take up to 48 hours to propagate through the internet, then you want to make sure that you go back and you click on Start Authentication from that email authentication page. So you want to make sure you do that final step, because if you don't, you've generated a key, you put it in your DNS, but Google isn't actually sending things out with the DKIM signature. So just make sure that you do that final step. Again, both the SPF record and the DKIM are strongly recommended by Google, and I'd recommend that you set them both up within your domain. Another option that comes up often, or another feature that a lot of organizations want, is email encryption. One of the primary email encryption services out there is Google Apps Message Encryption. It was actually built by Zix, which is a third-party provider out there. And you have limited support from Google. This is actually a third-party product. It's not a Google Direct product. But it encrypts your selected outgoing mail. It's leveraged. You can actually leverage a portal delivery or an inbox delivery, depending on how you have it configured. A portal delivery is a system by which a user will receive an email. They click on a link, and that link takes them to a portal that they log in. That email is stored on the portal, not actually on the user's inbox. Inbox delivery is where it will actually email it directly into a user's inbox. So again, a really good option. It works very well for email encryption. There are additional encryption options that are now coming on the market for Google Apps. So if encryption is something that your organization is looking at, definitely check into this. Google Apps message encryption is triggered usually with content filters. You usually set it up so that if it says encrypt or confidential in the subject, when it goes outbound, that the content filter then routes it into the email encryption system that Zix provides, and then it's delivered from there. So again, there are other options out there. Definitely a nice feature, particularly if you're dealing with very sensitive data, whether it be HIPAA data or maybe CGIS data or personal information, that type of stuff. Now I'm going to cover some of the management tools. One of the things that we've hit on, that I've tried to hit on throughout this, is that most of these settings are based on organizations and users. So I want to talk about some of the tools that are out there to help you manage and control your organizations and users, so that once you have your email routing configured, then it's just a matter of making sure your users are in the right location for their routing to be set up. First one I'm going to talk about is Google Apps Manager, or GAM as it's referred to. GAM is actually a very powerful tool. It's been around in the Google Apps ecosystem for several years. It's actually an open source tool. It's something that I've used throughout my time within Google Apps. It's incredibly powerful, and it gives you access to a lot of features in the APIs that aren't directly available through the control panel. It also allows you to do a lot of bulk updates and mass updates that would be very time consuming if you had to do them one by one within the control panel. It is a Python-based tool, and some limited knowledge of Python is really recommended to use GAM. You don't necessarily have to know how to code in Python, but you have to have enough basic knowledge that you can run some command line scripts in Python to make sure that you can run it correctly. Again, some of the recommended uses for this is, like I said, bulk user management. So, a lot of times when you're initially configuring a domain and you have, your 500 users that you need to upload, you can do that through here. It's a very fast tool, so it can, upload, 500 to 1,000 users in a very quick time frame. You can also do a lot of stuff with management of OUs. If you need to move users between OUs, create a new OU and move a bulk set of users there, you can do that. You can also manage your group settings. Keep in mind your group settings are all part of mail routing, because you do have an email address for every group, and mail is routed through essentially the same path. And then also delegation of user mailboxes. whether it's delegation from an executive to an executive admin, or whether it's someone who's left your organization and you want to delegate out the mailbox so that someone else can monitor the mail that's coming through there. One of the things to keep in mind with GAM, it is a very powerful tool. It's command line based. So you want to be careful that when you configure it with the tokens, you then kind of have full access to a lot of the API actions. So it can very quickly create issues if you perhaps have your CSV that you're uploading maybe formatted incorrectly or something done wrong. You can very quickly create a lot of updates within your domain that may not be correct. So you just want to make sure that you're very careful as you use it. Number one, from a security perspective, that only the select few that know fully how to use it and know when to use it are leveraging it and have the access to leverage it. And then you also want to make sure that before you run a script that's going to update 1,500 users that you've got everything formatted correctly. What I always did with large updates is I would take like my first 2 or 3 users, I would run that script, make sure that everything worked correctly, and then I would run the remaining 1,000, 1,500, sometimes 10,000 users. So just again, something you want to be careful with because it is a very powerful tool. You want to make sure that you're dealing with all risks. The other tool I want to talk about for managing your users and managing your domain is FlashPanel by BetterCloud. And FlashPanel is really a comprehensive solution for both security and management across your domain. So it allows you to not only manage and administrate all your users, but also provides additional security features to really control what type of usage and data people are sharing within your domain and with other domains. It is a unified set of tools. We often refer to it as a single pane of glass, so it's one place that you can log in and control all the different things from configuring users to groups. You can also change passwords, establish password policies, all of those type of features within your Google Apps infrastructure you're able to control through FlashPanel. You're also able to get very granular with the type of user roles that you can set up. So you can set up users so that they have very limited access to the control within FlashPanel. And the nice thing about FlashPanel is that they don't have to have any super admin or any administrator access within the actual Google Apps control panel. You can control it all through FlashPanel and through the admin roles. We also give you a lot of reports and information to allow you to uncover some risks and some things that are going on in your domain. We have the Domain Health and Insights Center, which allows you to really view what's going on in your domain and have warnings that come up. We also have policies on the back end that operate on third-party apps or Google Drive documents that you can really control what type of apps have access into your domain, as well as what type of information and data people are sharing outside your domain. So again, it gives you control over all kind of aspects of management, administration, and security of your Google Apps domain. For my last section, I'm going to cover some of the tools that Google provides on troubleshooting mail routing. You've got, this is the type of thing where you've got mail routing all configured, and suddenly, some users are seeing delays of 5, 10, an hour on delivery of mail, or maybe mail's not routing to the right place. Google actually provides a nice set of troubleshooting tools that can help you kind of figure this all out. And they're all accessible at toolbox.googleapps.com. So you can go on there. These tools are available. They're web-based, so you usually put the information necessary within the section, and then Google's going to spit out a result or information. Some of the recommended tools that I think you should spend some time with, just so you understand and know how to use. The first one is CheckMX. that does a very simple MX lookup to tell you where your MX records are pointed at. So you can go put in a domain name, and it'll come back and tell you here's where your MX records are configured and where your mail is going to be routed. They also have a dig tool where you can go through and validate DNS settings, including text records, so you can go through and validate that you've configured things correctly in your DNS setup as you're configuring the various different text records, SPF records, those type of things. You can do some validation against those. They also, as you go into the other tools section, there's a lot of tools that are kind of hidden in that other tools section that are very powerful. They have a sent message troubleshooter, helps you figure out what's gone on with the message that's sent out. We also have there's a message delay troubleshooter that's going to look at the message and try to pinpoint where the delay is. And it'll kind of go through the various different hops that an email message is taking and show you, what system is believed to cause the delay. And then they also have a sent message bounce troubleshooter. So that's when you send a message out and it bounces back, that troubleshooter will help you figure out why that message is bouncing back. A lot of these are really built around the key tool, and the one that I use the most is the message header analyzer. And if you go into an email message and you go to show original within Gmail, you can actually get the whole message header, and you can just cut and paste it into the message header analyzer, and that will help identify what's going on in your message header. You can step through each step, and if you're familiar with message headers, you can do a lot of troubleshooting in there. The nice thing about the analyzer is that it does a lot of that digging through message header for you and gives you that information on why a particular message is delayed, can give you the approximate source of the delays, and tell you kind of what system might be causing it. So it really allows you to narrow down the troubleshooting to figure out what's going on with messages that are maybe being delayed or bounced or something else is going on with them. And that's the end of my presentation. I have a few minutes here left for questions.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kyle. We don't have a ton of time here. But oops, it sounds like a little bit of an echo. Can you hear that, Kyle?
I cannot hear the echo.
All right, I'm just going to power through.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a few questions here. We don't have time to get to all of them. So one of them here. If we are using SMTP relay gmail.com as our SMTP relay for internal systems, are those messages automatically considered internal senders, specifying to bypass internal senders?
Yes, if you're using an SMTP relay to send email out from your internal systems, then if you have it configured correctly, it will route all email outbound through Gmail and will be considered internal email and will bypass. Got to keep in mind though that it needs to be configured as a proper email. The from address, for lack of a better term, needs to be aligned with your domain. A lot of times, all-in-one printers and some of these systems, they have a default from address that it comes from, Xerox, all-in-one scanner, something. If that is not configured correctly, then Google may view it as spam, even though you have set to bypass internal spam, because even though it is coming from Google systems, it doesn't match your domain. So as long as you have everything configured correctly, it should be treated as an internal message and bypass spam filters.
Getting back to GAM, which you mentioned a little bit, is there a recommended limit based off of usage versus sort of stat, I guess, when using GAM? I'm not sure exactly what sort of limit they're referring to, but Kyle, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I can try to address that. I mean, I've used GAM to update, tens of thousands of users in a single time. So So there's not a hard limit on the size. You just want to keep in mind that the various different aspects of that. It takes a while for it to process through those if you're running tens of thousands, so you may want to break it up into smaller chunks just to make sure you're managing and controlling it. And then, in terms of the other end on the how many changes do you want to make versus GAM versus doing it in the control panel, that's just more of a timing thing. If you've got to update 15 users, sometimes it is quicker to just go in the control panel and click through 15 users and do it rather than build a CSV in GAM and run it. So it's kind of personal preference, but GAM can handle large numbers of users and large numbers of changes.
Next question here. In the interest of speed and attachment size, wouldn't best practice be to route internal mail internally?
So you're saying to route internal mail rather than go out to the internet and back into Google servers. That's the way a lot of legacy email systems worked. So if you were on Exchange rather than send it out to the internet and back in, just basically handed it off to the mailbox. My understanding of the reason why Google has architected it that way is to make sure that all of the various rules and content filters and those types of things are applied on both the outbound and the inbound. And when you're talking about the practical way the way it works, it's actually not leaving the data center. It's not truly going out to the internet and back in. Google servers very quickly from the domain identify that it needs to be routed essentially back to their servers, and it's routed within there. So from a practical, worried about bandwidth and time and that type of stuff, it really doesn't make a difference on Google servers. The amount of bandwidth, the size of their pipes, the fact that it's really just being transferred within the data center on the practical end, it is the way it works. So, but it does allow you to get the full set of rules always applied, even if it's just internal mail.
Okay, we have time for a couple more here. Is it possible to only apply content-based routing to emails being sent to outside the organization? For example, enforcing users to not send proprietary info to outside addresses.
I don't believe that's possible. I believe that I can check on that and maybe post to the Guru group afterwards, but I believe with the content filters, it will be on all outbound email, and that will include internal email. But I can definitely write that down and maybe post to the Guru group after that.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, last one here, and I know Kyle and I can't speculate on Google's roadmap or anything like that, but Kyle, do you know if any said anything more about BGP and BG implementation that they were exploring? I think last year, maybe a month ago.
Yeah, I have not heard any more about that. I know that I think it was last year, a couple months ago, they were discussing it, but I have not heard any more. Which doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't still exploring it and could be ready to be released tomorrow. But I just haven't heard anything specifically about it in the last, probably since I initially heard about it a couple months ago.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this session. Kyle, I wanted to say thanks for an awesome presentation. Hopefully everyone learned a lot about messaging administration. We have one more presentation left to go today. That will be the Google Roundtable. So we'll be joined by 3 Google Apps admins to discuss managing their domains. So I urge all of you to join us if you have the time. But if not, it was a great presentation. We are happy to have all of you here. And thanks again for a great presentation, Kyle.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a little bit.